In Israel, as dozens are killed in a stampede at a religious festival. India's COVID case numbers continue spiralling upwards with another record daily rise as Brazil records more than 400,000 deaths from coronavirus. And Indonesia says a powerful internal wave may have caused the sinking of the Navy submarine. You're watching The World. Hello there, I'm Yvonne Yong. Also tonight, Cambodians under strict coronavirus lockdowns running out of food supplies. But first, at least 45 people have been crushed to death at an overcrowded religious festival in Israel's northeast. The stampede occurred at the Lag BaOmer festival, the first religious gathering of its kind to be held legally since COVID-19 restrictions were lifted. Authorities said overall capacity was similar to previous years, but COVID-19 precautionary partitions caused choke points on foot traffic. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the site, expressing his condolences to the dead's families and those injured.
The Mount Meron disaster is one of the worst disasters that has befallen the state of Israel. We will conduct a thorough, serious and in-depth investigation to ensure that such a disaster does not reoccur. I would like to declare a national day of mourning on Sunday. Let us all unite with the grief of the families and a prayer for the recovery of the wounded.
And we'll have more on that story a little later. The escalating coronavirus situation in India shows no signs of slowing, with a deadly second wave overwhelming hospitals, morgues and crematoriums. Today, the country reported yet another record number of new infections, with more than 386,000 new cases in the past 24 hours. Here, the federal government says getting vulnerable Australians out of India remains its #1 priority. South Asia correspondent James Oden reports from Delhi.
This world record-breaking COVID surge is really just not slowing down, and we simply don't know when we might actually hit that peak. The best projections are that the national peak will be a few weeks away, but every region of India will come and go at different stages as well. More infections than yesterday. The deaths are slightly lower, but this should never be treated as absolute, these figures. They should only be treated as indicative. And particularly with deaths as well, there's constant concern that the death rate isn't actually reflective of the true number. It's under the true number, simply because the coronavirus testing regime is completely overwhelmed. Both the testing regime just to get a test is overwhelmed, meaning many infections aren't being picked up, and health experts I've spoken with have said that because people can't get tested, that when they die from COVID at home, that death is not being properly recorded as a COVID death, so they expect the death toll to be even higher. Another thing as well with the death toll we should keep in mind is that it does always lag the rate of infection, and particularly as well with people getting serious sickness, it can take a week or 2 weeks before you enter this more aggressive phase and people in hospitals do start dying. Certainly one of the hospitals I spoke with yesterday in Delhi says the problem is that you have a lot of people now filling up beds, and because the sickness is so much worse this time, they're staying in that bed for a lot longer, meaning other people can't get the bed, and usually these kind of more deadly symptoms emerge usually around week 2 of their infection. You know, one of the things, for instance, that people here are looking forward to is for a new kind of phase in the vaccine program rollout. The program has only been targeted for people over 45 up until now. As of tomorrow, it's meant to be for every adult, anyone over 18. So that would give some hope, but the problem is already there have been massive shortages in the vaccine program rollout. It's always been underperforming since day one. And now we've already heard that, for instance, states like Delhi and Maharashtra and Punjab, they're not going to get started tomorrow on this big new phase of the program because they've run out of vaccines. And that there are some people, some hospitals who are ordering vaccines from one of the manufacturers here. They can't get it, so they have to go to the other. So you've got several large states who are now admitting they've run out of vaccines, and they're going to have to push back the date of this new phase even further. So it's still, even when you're trying to look for some optimism in what's happening in India, it's still pretty hard to find.
James Oaten there. There's been a breach of the Trans-Tasman bubble in Perth, with a woman from the Cook Islands arriving from Auckland without spending 2 weeks in quarantine in New Zealand first. Men in PPE boarded flight NZ175 when it landed in Perth this afternoon to check on the woman. She was then taken to a city quarantine hotel for 2 weeks and will have to undergo a COVID-19 test. The other passengers were allowed to disembark and advised they did not have to self-isolate or quarantine.
Well, we had 2 guys go down there, all in PPE gear, and it took forever. We were just sitting on the plane and waiting. We weren't told anything.
The World Health Organization has reported 0 cases of COVID-19 in the Cook Islands. WA Health says it's very unlikely the passenger could have coronavirus. Brazil has just passed an unwanted milestone in its fight against coronavirus, recording more than 400,000 deaths from COVID-19. Only the US has registered more deaths so far. Daily case and death numbers in Brazil have dropped recently, but a shortage of vaccines and an increase in economic activity have some experts sounding dire warnings. North America correspondent Barbara Miller reports.
Brazil's vaccine drive is reaching some of the most far-flung communities. 900 people at this remote site got the shot in one go.
The community was so not only happy, but so moved by this.
But countrywide, the inoculation effort is slow and stalling. Even with an appointment, you can be turned away.
I came to get vaccinated, but I've been told there isn't any vaccine. The worker told me to come back next week.
It's an embarrassment. This is a joke. Those bloody politicians.
When he moved to Porto Alegre 2 years ago, Adelaide man Troy Holmes could never have guessed he'd find himself in a global COVID hotspot. He and his pregnant Brazilian wife are scared.
Our daily life consists of this apartment. We are in the apartment 24/7, leaving the apartment purely to go to doctor's visits and to buy food.
And when you go to those doctor's appointments, do you feel in a safe environment there?
No. We are scared of everything. We've been to appointments and we've just stood in the middle of the room so we don't have to touch any of the chairs.
The president is still playing it all down, encouraging Brazilians to get back to normality. Many are heeding that call.
Next month, probably have some increase because all the economic activities return now.
There are now real fears this merciless second wave will turn into a third. Barbara Miller, ABC News.
Hong Kong pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong and 3 others have pleaded guilty in a district court to participating in last year's Tiananmen Square vigil. They took part on June the 4th to commemorate the 1989 crackdowns, a historical event sensitive for mainland China, but traditionally honoured in Hong Kong every year. Joshua Wong is currently behind bars for his role in 2 other protests, and the 4 will be sentenced next week. Indonesia's Navy officials say the submarine that sank last week off the coast of Bali may have been dragged down by a powerful internal wave. The Lombok Strait is known to have these internal waves occurring almost fortnightly. They happen when the current between 2 channels, one shallow and one deep, creates an exceptionally strong tidal flow. The ocean appears calm, while beneath the surface, huge waves the height of skyscrapers move slowly, exerting an intense vertical pull. One was recorded around the time the submarine disappeared last week. Conflict between Myanmar's ruling military and separatist militias has taken a dark turn. Thousands of ethnic Karen in the country's east are now displaced after days of skirmishes and airstrikes between competing forces. Thailand is rapidly expanding its response efforts as villagers continue to flee. Here's Tyson Whelan.
These are the innocent victims of a months-long conflict in a decades-old dispute. Here on the banks of the Salween River, thousands of ethnic Karen are fleeing their homes as Myanmar's military coup sparks more unrest.
I had to flee across the river. People say the Burmese will come and shoot us, so we fled here.
A truce between the untrusting Karen and the ruling Tatmadaw army quickly deteriorated when the coup was launched in February. The quiet southeastern state of Karen, now the site of persistent guerrilla warfare. On Tuesday, the Karen National Liberation Army attacked a military outpost, killing 13 Myanmar soldiers. It marked a step up in fighting from the Karen forces, who are banding with urban pro-democracy groups to put pressure on the military junta. The retaliation came in the form of airstrikes, pushing thousands more villagers to seek refuge in Thailand.
The situation has escalated and we can't go back. Security officials won't let us. We can't go back.
Thailand has yet to take sides in the conflict, ever closing on its own border, but those fleeing have been met with humanitarian assistance. In a statement, the Karen Peace Support Network said in the coming days more than 8,000 Karen will have to flee to Thailand. We hope that the Thai army will help them escape this war. There's no end in sight to the violence as the international community pushes for Myanmar's military to stand down. These displaced families given no option but to await that day. Tyson Whelan, ABC News.
Returning to our top story now, and at least 45 people have been crushed to death at an overcrowded religious festival in Israel's northeast. For more, I am joined by AP News Director for Israel and the Palestinian territories, Joseph Federman. Joseph, good to have you on our show. Has it become any clearer now what exactly happened during this event?
Yeah, what we're hearing from witness accounts and reports is that this was a very, very crowded event, lots of people in a small space, and it appears that a group of people slipped on some metal stairs. That caused other people to fall down. That caused panic. The next thing you know, you have a stampede and 45 people were killed.
Can you tell us a bit more about what survivors and witnesses have been saying and how they've described what happened?
Yeah, there is a lot of anger right now toward the government, obviously. What you hear from people, there's a debate on two sides. You know, on one side, you hear health officials saying this thing was way too crowded, it was poorly planned, and they do this event every year, and it was just a matter of time before we saw a disaster. But the people who went and celebrated are very upset at police and at the government because they say that the procedures were changed this year. Areas that normally were used to exit the area were closed off, they say, by police barricades, and that caused more panic and people had nowhere to go. So you're seeing the beginning of, process of finger pointing.
And it was the largest event to be held in Israel since the coronavirus pandemic began. What numbers are people saying in terms of how many attended, and how was the site prepared for such crowds?
Yeah, you have to understand what this event is. This is sort of an obscure holiday. It's called Lag BaOmer. It is not a major Jewish holiday, but it's a very popular Jewish holiday, especially with ultra-Orthodox worshippers. This location, Mount Meron, is revered as the burial place of a famous Jewish mystic from the 2nd century. And every year you have this event, Lag BaOmer, where tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people go there. The customs are, to an outsider, a bit strange. You have huge crowds lighting bonfires, drinking, dancing, praying. It's a very festive event. But for many years, people have said it's dangerous to bring this many people together in such a closed space. And it was just a matter of time before something like this happened.
Well, officials did send a warning out due to the COVID risks. What else were authorities saying?
Yeah, you had a number of warnings. Last year was the first year where the crowds were scaled back because of COVID. But you probably know Israel has done a very good job with its vaccination campaign, and the country really has bounced back to life over the past month or two as almost the entire adult population is vaccinated at this point. So they're saying there were about 100,000 people there this year.
And how have authorities responded to the tragedy, what has happened? It's been described as the worst civilian disaster in modern history.
Yeah, right now there is just sort of this national feeling of nationwide shock, even among the secular populations. People are very upset. Prime Minister Netanyahu went there to examine the location and to express his sympathy, and he was jeered by protesters. He was met there and people were yelling at him. So there's a lot of public anger. There's also a political component here because Netanyahu is in the process of trying to put together a new government. We had an election about a month ago, and he has until Tuesday to put together a government. And he's very dependent on these same ultra-Orthodox people who are now angry at him. Their political parties tend to be his allies. So it's going to be interesting to see over the next couple of days how that affects his ability to put together a new government.
Indeed, Joseph Federman, thanks so much for talking to us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison's facing renewed calls to set up a network of dedicated quarantine hubs for international passenger arrivals. Opposition leader Anthony Albanese says the hotel quarantine system is not fit for purpose, joining some Labor premiers who are anxious about COVID-19 breakouts that stem from virus hotspots, including India. Political editor Andrew Probyn reports.
In India's COVID catastrophe, these may be the lucky ones, receiving medical care and oxygen.
It is very bad. It's beyond bad, actually.
In the streets, death haunts, funeral pyres too few for the demand. Precious oxygen supplies dispersed any way they can, the need unending. Another daily infection record tumbling. Flights from India to Australia are on pause for the next fortnight. Already there are calls for that to be extended.
We've asked for flights to be deferred during May.
The Northern Territory Chief Minister warning the Howard Springs quarantine facility is nearing its limit for COVID infections, the majority from India.
The Commonwealth does have facilities. They want to bring people home, as we all do, and it should be a joint effort.
Enough is enough.
Anthony Albanese saying COVID outbreaks from hotel quarantine are avoidable health and economic risks.
Scott Morrison needs to stand up and say that in every state and territory there will be a fit-for-purpose quarantine facility established.
Victoria's already put forward a proposal for a quarantine hub.
I've seen some political smoke and mirrors over my time, and I think this is right at the top of the list.
The Melbourne Centre would need federal approval and Commonwealth money.
This is a $15 million generous donation from the Victorian government to do the planning for a $700 million bill that they want the Commonwealth to pick up.
We can take that as a no from the Commonwealth on the Victorian proposal, and probably Anthony Albanese's idea too. Not that we heard directly from the Prime Minister. He didn't face the cameras after today's National Cabinet, despite placing leaders on a supposed war footing a fortnight ago. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
There'll be no new restrictions and no change to Australia's travel bubble with New Zealand, despite a COVID breach at Brisbane Airport yesterday. 2 travellers from hotspot Papua New Guinea were allowed into a common area with almost 400 people. One of the travellers today tested positive to coronavirus, but health authorities say the risk is low.
Flights to and from New Zealand continued at Brisbane Airport today, with passengers masked and complying with signage to keep people from high-risk countries separate. But yesterday morning, 2 travellers in transit from Papua New Guinea should have remained in the red zone, but were mistakenly ushered into the green, with 390 people awaiting 3 flights to New Zealand. Over 2 hours, the pair visited a cafe, shops and a bathroom.
Through CCTV footage, we've seen that people were wearing masks, people were maintaining social distance. The table that the 2 people sat at was thoroughly cleaned.
When the mistake was realised, they were immediately COVID tested. One was negative and placed in quarantine, the other inconclusive and admitted to hospital. Affected passengers on their way to Christchurch and Auckland found out when they landed.
I'm not happy that there's been a breach, that
that is not what you expect when you have got such strict protocols.
Due to an inconclusive COVID result, the man was retested and this morning returned a positive result. But health authorities aren't alarmed.
He's right at the end of his illness. He could almost be fully recovered.
Officials consider it to present a relatively low risk to travellers. Passengers who do develop symptoms are urged to have a COVID test. Airport staff who had direct contact with the PNG travellers have been quarantined. Others will undergo extra training.
It's a relatively new private staff member from within the Brisbane Airports Corporation firm and employment regime. But we'll be very clear that's unacceptable.
This is not about finger pointing, it was an innocent mistake. So we're focusing on retraining, reconfirming the procedures and continuing with that.
There have also been 2 COVID cases detected in hotel quarantine. Sally Eales, ABC News.
300,000 people in Cambodia are under strict lockdown as the country tries to stem the rising number of COVID infections. Residents in designated red zones, including the capital, are not even allowed to leave the house for food. But some say they're going hungry as supplies are not being delivered fast enough. To discuss this more, I'm joined by Southeast Asia correspondent Mazoe Ford from Bangkok. Mazoe, that's pretty strict, not being allowed to leave the house to even get food. It would require massive coordination from authorities to ensure people don't go hungry.
Yvonne, some of the people who have taken to social media to say that they have not got any food left have compared this to the Khmer Rouge period in the late 1970s. They say they are going hungry, they say they need to leave their homes, but they're not allowed to leave their homes. The government has said that while all of these people are under lockdown as the COVID-19 infections surge, that the authorities will deliver some food packages to them, and that has certainly begun. Food packages including rice, fish sauce, soy sauce, tinned fish and bottled water have been delivered to thousands of homes across Phnom Penh, which is the main area affected. It is in one of those red zones you mentioned. But we've also heard from many people who have not received these aid packages yet. Human rights groups say that the government has been quite selective as to who's receiving these packages. People in vulnerable communities have not yet received them. People who've been any kind of activist in the past have not received them. So people who've been critical of the government in any way have not received them. So while the government has got a program in place to deliver aid packages around Phnom Penh and the other areas in the red zones, what we're hearing is that the packages aren't reaching everyone who needs them. One family we heard from said that they were down to just 10 eggs and they'd ordered a government package and it hadn't arrived and they weren't sure what they were going to do. They've got one now, but they don't know how long it will last.
And Mazoe, those found breaking COVID rules are being punished quite badly. Tell us more about the government response so far.
So the rule is you can't leave your home if you live in a red zone unless it's for medical reasons. So you can't go out to buy groceries or other basic necessities. You can't go to work. You can't go out and exercise. You can't go for a walk. People who've been caught breaking these rules have been caned and they've been arrested. Many of these people already have a court date down the track for these offences. So these are basic human rights, the right to food, the right to water, exercise, fresh air, etc., that human rights groups say are being abused because of this very strict lockdown. And a lot of the people that we've heard from and that we've read their posts on social media have said they are not opposed to a lockdown of some kind. They understand it's necessary to try to curb the spread of COVID-19. But this one is just so very strict with the chance of being beaten or arrested that it really is quite terrifying for them and they face an impossible choice. Stay home and go hungry, go out and get beaten or arrested. So it really has been quite a traumatic time for a lot of people who live in these red zones over the past week or so, Yvonne.
Really difficult situation. How bad is the second wave of infections Cambodians are experiencing at the moment?
Yvonne, it started at the end of February and sort of just ballooned at the start of April. And in the past couple of weeks, the past week rather, cases have exceeded 550 a day. On Thursday, there was a record of 880 cases. Today, there was 761. So there are now 13,000 cases and 93 deaths in Cambodia during this pandemic, which is not a high number when you look at countries like India. However, this second wave in Cambodia, its most serious wave, is spreading very, very quickly, and the authorities are absolutely determined to make sure that it doesn't become a situation like India. So all of these countries that don't quite have the same numbers, the situation is still very serious. Prime Minister Hun Sen said that he felt his country was on the brink of death when he locked down all of these red zones with the most infections. But certainly human rights groups are concerned that they're not being called in to help, that authorities are trying to go this alone, whether that's trying to save face. But human rights groups, aid organisations, NGOs want to help. They are there trying to help. Some of them are managing to get some aid packages in, and they are really keen to do some more, and they are calling on the international community as well to do whatever it can to put pressure on the Cambodian government to accept that help.
Meanwhile, Mazoe, what's the situation like in neighbouring Thailand, where you are now?
Yvonne, here in Thailand, the case numbers have gone down. They were hovering around the 2,000 mark earlier in the week and late last week. Today we're down to just over 1,500, but there have been 15 deaths today. And so Thai authorities have said that while we can, we shouldn't really relax. We should not relax, because 1,500 cases down from 2,000, firstly, is not that big a difference. Secondly, the people who are getting sick are very ill, and there are more deaths, so that's very concerning to the Thai authorities. Some 250 people are currently on ventilators, and the hospital beds that have been allocated for COVID-19 are already full, so people are having to go to hotel quarantine rooms that have been adapted for them, or field hospitals that have been created around the country, predominantly here in Bangkok, where there are the most infections. The government is trying to order more vaccines. Every day the headlines are saying that they've now asked this country or that country for more vaccines, because the main rollout here is not due to start until June. So people here are very dubious that with this current wave, combined with the delay still in receiving the vaccines, that this situation is going to improve anytime soon. There's not a strict lockdown here, but there may as well be, because people are being told to work from home. Schools are shut, shops have reduced hours, you're not allowed to go to the park, to the pool, to entertainment venues, to gyms. So people here are trying to do their bit, and the government has certainly encouraged everyone to do their bit to try to bring these case numbers under control.
Zoe, thanks for updating us. Brittany Higgins has told the Prime Minister his government needs to show leadership and drive cultural change inside Parliament House. Emerging from her long-awaited meeting with Scott Morrison, the former Liberal staffer described the talks as honest and robust. Ms Higgins says she's hopeful he'll do the right thing by women. Here's political reporter Jane Norman.
Her story triggered a tectonic shift. And today, Brittany Higgins finally got her meeting with the Prime Minister.
It was a difficult conversation to have at a personal level. It was very hard to come here.
Once a powerless staffer, Ms Higgins has become a figurehead for a new force.
Do you believe he gets it? I'm hopeful that he is going to do the right thing by the women in Parliament. There is a strange culture of silence.
2 months ago, the 26-year-old went public.
I woke up mid-rape, essentially.
Alleging she'd been assaulted by a senior male colleague inside a minister's office in 2019. What followed was a national reckoning.
If it can happen in Parliament House, it can truly happen anywhere.
Compounding the trauma, Ms Higgins felt she'd been treated as a political problem when she told her trusted colleagues what had happened.
The Prime Minister acknowledged that the system had let me down.
a system that puts the power in the hands of the politicians to hire and fire at their whim and affords staffers very few protections.
Whether a power dynamic.
To fix it, Ms Higgins wants an overhaul of the legislation that sets out employment conditions for staff and an independent authority set up to handle HR issues and complaints.
I think there was a consensus that reform needs to happen.
She has shown extraordinary courage.
Earlier, Ms Higgins had a meeting with the opposition leader who's publicly backing her demands.
At the centre of her asks is a modest and a reasonable one.
Brittany Higgins's meetings today with the nation's leaders were designed in part to maintain momentum for change. Parliament House is a unique workplace, but for too long that's been used as an excuse for bad behaviour and a poor culture. Ms Higgins says the onus is now on the Morrison government to show leadership and change that. Jane Norman, ABC News, Canberra.
Belgian authorities have melted 22,000 guns into recycled steel. Around half of the firearms were handed in by owners around the country. The other half were outdated police weapons. This was the third time Belgian security forces had done this. Together, the weapons were transformed into some 60 tonnes of recycled steel. Now here's one for the thrill seekers. The world's longest pedestrian suspension bridge has opened in northern Portugal. It's 561 metres or more than half a kilometre long. It hangs 175 metres above a fast-flowing river. Residents hope the attraction will revive the region's tourism industry after the pandemic. Now to what in the world, and most brides try to avoid mud on their wedding day. But when a cow in labour needed help, this Victorian dairy farmer got stuck in. Despite rescheduling the big day during calving season because of the pandemic and having one cow named Drama overdue, Jessa and Ben Law's wedding was going off without a hitch. But just after the speeches, the bride had to run away when she heard Drama was having some drama. Jessa says she didn't even think about her white dress or shoes and jumped straight in to help the new calf who was stuck. It all came good in the end. The calf was named Destiny and both mother and baby are healthy. What a moving day for the newlyweds. You're watching The World. The top stories we're following tonight. At least 45 people have been killed in a stampede at a religious festival in northeast Israel. India hits another record number of new COVID-19 infections with 386,000 cases, putting further strain on hospitals, morgues and crematoriums. And Hong Kong's Joshua Wong and 3 other pro-democracy activists have pleaded guilty to participating in an illegal Tiananmen Square vigil last year. Returning to our top story now, and the death toll from a stampede at a religious festival in Israel has risen to 45. The country's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, says he's praying for the well-being of those injured, calling it a heavy disaster. Middle East correspondent Tom Joyner has more.
It happened at an annual religious festival called Lag BaOmer. Now this normally in pre-COVID times would have attracted hundreds of thousands of religious Jews, including many from the ultra-Orthodox community. Last year it was cancelled due to coronavirus restrictions, but it did go ahead this year, albeit with the health authorities warning against people from attending due to the lingering risk of coronavirus transmission. The stampede itself, it's not entirely clear what triggered the stampede. We know it happened in the early hours of Friday morning. In the middle of the night, this festival was continuing. But what we do know is clear from many videos posted to social media that have been broadcast widely on Israeli television showing enormous crowds. Police estimate 100,000 people in attendance. Enormous crowds packed into small areas, in some cases with police barricades preventing the crowds from dispersing. Really an extraordinary disaster to have happened at what was meant to be a peaceful religious event. You would see from the pictures coming out of that incident that there were immediately many paramedics on the scene. The response of the country's emergency services was swift, with rescue helicopters. An elite rescue team from the country's military was sent in. Transportation to Mount Meron was cut off to try and prevent those crowds from growing, and the country's rail service trying to encourage people to get on trains going back south away from the country. Certainly those sorts of rescue efforts continue, and it'll be in the coming days and weeks that we'll get a full picture of what the damage has been, the human cost, as well as any blame that would be apportioned. Now, the police in the area have deflected blame for what they have described as an unpreventable disaster. There had been teams that went out in advance of the festival to check on the integrity of the structural integrity in the area, but the local police commander there deflecting blame. So it'll be certainly something that will be worked out in the coming days and weeks.
Turkey has started a 17-day coronavirus lockdown, the first comprehensive shutdown in the country. People will have to stay home except for essential shopping and urgent medical treatment, while schools and businesses have also been closed. The lockdown was introduced after health officials reported more than 300 COVID-related deaths a day this month. Authorities claim the virus is under control, but partial restrictions have failed to stem the number of cases. Regional health ministers in India say they have no COVID-19 vaccines ahead of a government plan to start vaccinating all adults. India reported nearly 380,000 new infections and more than 3,000 deaths yesterday. Medical experts believe India's true COVID numbers are 5 to 10 times greater than the official tally. Although it is the world's biggest producer of vaccines, India does not have the stocks for the estimated 800 million people now eligible.
We have received the order to vaccinate adults over 18 years of age, but we are unable to even buy the vaccines. Even though we have money ready to purchase it, the vaccines are not available.
Well, an Indian man has been charged for taking to social media to find oxygen for his dying grandfather, with police accusing him of spreading rumours. The man is one of thousands of people who have been sending out SOS tweets in search of hospital beds, oxygen and drugs for sick family members. For more on this, I'm joined by co-editor of Quartz India, Itika Sharma Punit from New Delhi. Now, Itika, tell us more about this man who's been arrested after appealing for help on social media. It does sound quite distressing.
So this happened in India's largest state, Uttar Pradesh, where a man was arrested by the local police earlier this week. He had tweeted out that he needed oxygen for his old grandfather, but the local police and politicians from the region say that when they tried to reach him, they contacted him. They found out that his grandfather had died of heart attack and not due to COVID, and he did not need oxygen support. So the cops have arrested him for creating fear among people. Even if the police is right in this case, there is enough similar and more painful, very authentic messages all over Indian social media right now of people pleading for oxygen, medicines, hospital beds for their friends and family. That's literally the only conversation that we have all been having with our friends and families for the last 2 weeks now. So there is no denying that the situation is very dire.
I understand even tech companies are also responding to the call for help. One matchmaking app has gone from matching potential partners to matching plasma types.
Yes. So many Indian companies are stepping up. Everyone, every individual, every company, whatever they can do to help the situation, they are coming forward and trying, most of them. This matchmaking app, Truly Madly, that you're talking about, is an Indian matchmaking app, and they have launched an initiative where they are asking people to register with them, and they are using their matchmaking algorithm to match donors and patients for plasma. There are many other startups, several large unicorns who have launched fundraisers. They are doing a variety of things, including trying to import oxygen concentrators or oxygen tanks from other countries, feeding families that are suffering right now, because there are thousands of families where all members are COVID positive. If they are not in the hospitals, they are in isolation at their homes. The steel industry in India, for instance, also has been asked by the government to start supplying all of the oxygens at their plants to the hospitals. Many countries have offered support to India, but the shortfall really is so big because it's been about 10 days since all the companies, industries, governments have been trying to salvage the situation, supply more oxygen, but there's still just unending ask of people who are struggling to get oxygen for their friends and family.
Yet, Itika, we're hearing from some officials that there is sufficient oxygen. Things are under control and people don't need to panic. They're painting a very different picture of what's really going on there.
So there has been a huge criticism of the central government and the several state governments about how they are trying to clamp down or stop the criticism. In the last week, the Indian government has sent notices to Twitter, Facebook and Instagram to take down around 100 posts and block several accounts that were discussing the pandemic and how the government is managing the situation. But I really believe that the magnitude of outcry on Indian social media is so huge that it will be almost impossible to brush this under the carpet, even if someone was trying to do it.
Is it true that there's even a website dedicated to fact-checking whether oxygen supplies are available or not?
There are several platforms, several apps, several websites that people have developed. Some of these websites are specific to cities, specific to states, specific to localities in certain cases. Everyone I talked to for the last 2 weeks is just sort of trying to verify leads, put them on platforms like these. Many social media influencers, for that matter, have been doing this, just calling people, verifying leads, amplifying. So there are several such platforms which are trying to match the demand and supply of medicines, hospital beds and oxygen.
In terms of the overall coordination of these supplies, what falls under the federal government's responsibility and what's left up to the state?
See, for a lot of these things, there are grey areas, but largely oxygen supply to states is something that the centre needs to ensure. At every level, every government is doing something right now. I truly believe that the situation is so dire that whether it is the central government or the state government, any politician or any influential, anyone who has any say in this country should just act right now, because it is really not the time to try and figure out whose job it really is. Whoever has any pull should just come into action.
Has India even reached its peak of COVID cases there? What are experts there saying?
So there was a report today from CLSA, a couple of days back from CLSA, which is saying that on the basis of their examining other countries that had a second wave, a big second wave, it might be until June for India to peak, India's second wave to peak, and that would be devastating given the situation we are in right now.
Indeed, it seems like such a long time away. And we keep reporting that the health system is on the brink of collapse. From what you're seeing, are most hospitals, medical centres already overwhelmed and not able to cope?
Most definitely. For instance, we've been at Quads, we've been culling data, whatever is available from state governments, and most data shows that there are very few and in many states no hospitals left. In a lot of cases, the data that the government is putting out does not match the narrative of people on the ground, because if, for instance, government's data shows that there are beds available in a particular hospital, when patients actually reach there, they are just turned away on the gates and they are told there are no beds available. So the shortages are just showing with everything. The healthcare system is tired. My heart goes out to the doctors and nurses in this country who have been fighting this battle for a year now, and it's just become so much more difficult.
And crematoriums are resorting to using car parks and other public spaces to send off the dead. What are the authorities doing about this?
It is I mean, we have been seeing images all over the internet. I'm sure all over the world we've seen images of how cremations in India are being done on parking lots and footpaths and basically anywhere where people can find the space to do it. So far, we haven't heard anything concrete from state governments or the centre about what they are doing about this situation. But given the way things are going and the number of cases rising every day, it was more than 385,000 today. It just feels like this is only going to become much more difficult, and the images are going to be much more heartbreaking if we don't act soon.
Itika Sharma Punit, really devastating to hear this news, but thank you for bringing us those updates. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Western Australia has recorded